Okay, hi everyone. We're going to give it a couple of minutes because Zoom sometimes takes some time to trickle people in. Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second of 3 Coffeehouse Lab events as part of Elham Puriya Mehr's month-long curatorial residency at Griffin Art Projects. Coffeehouselab 2, Elham Puriya Mehr in conversation with Viviana Checchia. My name is Bahar Mohazebnia, and I'm the Assistant Curator of Engagement at Griffin Art Projects. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that our work takes place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish nations, to whom we are deeply grateful. I would also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that I'm actually hosting you all virtually from the traditional territories of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot First Nation tribes of the Siksika, the Pekoni, the Kainai, the Stoney Nakoda First Nation tribes of the Chiniki, the Bearspaw, and Wellesley and Tsuut'ina First Nations. The city of Calgary is also homeland to the historic Northwest Métis and to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. I would also like to thank the BC Arts Council, North Vancouver Recreation and Culture, as well as the Freybe Foundation for their generous support of Griffin's residency programs, as well as their affiliated public programs. Curated by Elham Puriya Mehr, an independent curator based in Vancouver, this 4-week residency delves into Elham Puriya Mehr's curatorial research on the third space, the effective atmosphere of coffeehouses. She positions coffeehouses on the border of fiction and nonfiction to encourage our imagination about the abilities of these social spaces for the not yet. The research concentrates on the potentialities of joy and collective conversation against the biopolitics of happiness defied by capitalism. Today's talk will focus on curatorial conviviality and how that can be explored through various formats and devices. Conviviality will be considered here as a condition for social interactions, specifically those connected with hospitality. The talk will share a variety of practical examples through a primary focus on the Vessel Art Project. Vessel's practice will be explained and unpacked as embedded in an ongoing act of hosting and being hosted, manifesting itself through public programming, commissioning, and writing. I'll hand it over to Elham to speak further about the project and to introduce our guest speaker, Viviana Checchia. But before I do that, I do just want to note that after this conversation, we would like to open in the floor up to a Q&A. So feel free to type your question in the Q&A and I'll read it out loud. Zoom also gives us the option to raise your hand. So you can raise your hand and I'll enable you to speak out loud and you can ask your question out loud. And without further ado, I will pass things on to Elham.
Thank you, Bahar, for the introduction and welcome everyone. My name is Elham Puriya Mehr. I'm an independent curator based in Vancouver on the unceded territories of First Nations. I initially met Viviana in Tehran during a curatorial symposium curated by our mutual friend, Freshde Mousavi. Dear friend, she's not here today. And years later, we crossed paths again at Delphina Foundation in London. But, you know, it was very interesting to see Viviana with a constant smile and the hospitable spirit. What has consistently stood out to me is her enduring spirit of hospitality. And so for this Coffeehouselab event, which emphasizes the concept of curatorial conviviality, I believe engaging in a conversation with Viviana will provide fresh perspective on the subject. Now I'm trying to give you a brief introduction about Viviana. Viviana Checchia is a curator, programmer, and researcher active internationally. She holds a PhD from Loughborough University that focuses on alternative Mediterranean curatorial practices. Viviana is a director of Void Art Center in Derry and co-director of Vessel, an international curatorial platform based in Puglia, south of Italy. for the support of social, cultural, and economic development through contemporary art. Previous to these roles, she was residency curator at Delphina Foundation, London, senior lecturer on the MFA at HDK Walland, University of Gothenburg, and public engagement curator at the Center for Contemporary Art, CCA Glasgow. Viviana has produced and contributed to a range of international projects, including the Young Artist for the Year Award, Ramallah Biennale, and the fourth Athens Biennale. I try to start this conversation with Jacques Derrida's statement when he argues that friendship is a political above all because it frees itself from traditional ties such as familial, neighborhood, national, political, linguistic, and finally generic pertinence, and creates a space where every other is equally altogether other. In this challenging situation that we are all experiencing, the crisis climate of ongoing economic problem, war, and invasion, the main and also I think the general question is, how can we as curators establish a convivial space when these elements sometimes seem colorless in our profession? But I try to divide this question into many small questions to Viviana, and I want to first ask Viviana if you want to say hi. And after that, if in your opinion, what does conviviality in curatorial labor means?
Thank you so much. So first of all, hi everybody joining us, and thank you Griffin Art Projects for having me and Elham for inviting me. It's an honor to be here and to share this space, hopefully a space of conviviality as well. Yeah, the question about what conviviality can mean and how can that be articulated within the labor performed, let's say, in the curatorial practice. I would say that most of my thinking theoretically is really connected with Ivan Illich and with his position as a sort of resistance against the industrialization of the world and the mechanisms that are connected with that, which of course, most of the time when related to the working place and to labor, are accompanied with all sorts of criteria about efficiency and productivity, and therefore, work more, work faster, and having better results. And maybe because of the Mediterranean culture I come from, or because of my agricultural heritage, most of my family was invested in farming and organic farming, and learned a lot out of the connection with nature, but also other human beings. I believe that refusing those criteria, working somehow against this idea of productivity and efficiency, is a political act, and conviviality and hospitality are part of that standpoint as a curator. So in my work, I tend to privilege actually the connection with other fellow curators or artists, as well as communities and all sorts of agents, stakeholders, people that would be part of the work that we are doing, and value really those moments of encounter, those moments that perhaps in most processes are not really valued, or they are seen as a waste of time because they are not productive enough. But instead, in my practice, they are actually the basic point of development of projects and ideas and exchange. And I really believe that when we feel more at ease and more connected as human beings, and above all, when all that also happen with a strong connection with nature, is when we can elaborate further on our thinking and really think out of the box. As creative practitioners, as we are, I think that one of our biggest mission is to make sense. And the best way to make sense is not under pressure to deliver, but it is by feeling free, not to have that freedom of connection with reality and trying to make sense of it together with other people.
Wonderful.
So I would say that's why conviviality is so important, and that's why for me it's really part of the work of the curator.
That's amazing. Actually, when you were talking, I was thinking about the first event. We had it in Griffin Art Project. I talked a bit about the event itself and the connection between event and curatorial, and how sometimes curating the exhibition, because it follows the kind of, the politics of representation, right? And so because of this, it also follows the biopolitics. And as you mentioned, it's more about production, making plans, programs, many plans for the institutions, but in curatorial projects, mostly we are focusing on the event and how to work collectively together. And so it's also very important to understand how we can start, this friendship, this connection with each other. And then through this friendship and this hospitable space and this convivial space, then I think we can create something and share it with others, or create with others from the base. I think this is also very important. So it makes me to ask you the second question, which is why it is important that curators can create a convivial space, and how it is possible, based on your experience.
I would say it has always been very important, and now even more, because in my experience, we are all living in a sort of time-deprived environment. The arts, I cannot speak for Canada, I don't have an experience, but in continental Europe, and I would say in vast part of the UK, are not very well supported at the moment. Lots of people are just spending most of their time fundraising and figuring out ways of survival. As a result of that, we are super stretched. The workload is massive. People are burning out every single day. So I would say that figuring out how to find your place of conviviality is also becoming a struggle. So when curators can commit to find ways to create platforms for others to have conviviality, then it means that they are also contributing not only to the development of the practice, but also to mental health and well-being, and to the real, making of superstructures that would be beneficial for a different development of our thinking and our making. And why it's so important is also because there is scarcity of them. There are not so many places and there are not so many projects where people are really invited to slow down and to be convivial. In general, there is more request for, production of something and delivering of an outcome. My specific standpoint is the one of a curator that works less with exhibition making and more with process making. So it's also quite specific, because when I talk about my practice, I don't generally talk about creating something in the white cube, the gallery. I would specifically connect with the public sphere, with other communities and their own locations rather than the gallery. It could be a community garden, a community hall, or it could be a bar. It could be in a coffee house. So for me, that's also interesting, because somehow I intervene within the conviviality of other sectors and the exploration of conviviality made by people that perhaps are not witnessing the same sort of dynamics we do within the arts. And I think that makes me discover every day more how important it is for us to create more conviviality within the arts.
For sure, yeah. And also, like, I was thinking about the tools, because I believe we cannot have a specific or, defined tools for conviviality, right? So as you mentioned about the situation in Europe and all over the world, now we are in the, like a kind of crisis of war, invasion, many things that's happening and affect us. And so I think we should think about convivial tools based on condition, right?
Absolutely.
And yeah, please.
I'm not sure if I'm going to say the obvious now, but I really think that it's almost impossible to generalize conviviality, as it is impossible to universalize many other things. So whatever is that we develop must be then bespoke, which perhaps is then proven that this chat is not needed, because what we are going to share is not applicable anywhere in the same way and scalable in the same way, no? But is an example, and then each one of us and people listening can make their own. I really believe that talking about, above all, conviviality, the first thing we should be aware of is what is the local environment and the culture where we are trying to then reproduce conviviality. I'm not trying to sponsor some sort of nationalistic attitude or anything like that. I really believe in the basic principle of observing what is the environment around you and trying to respond to that. That's the first thing that is really part of your curatorial practice. A little bit like the artist placement group was advocating for, the context is half of the work. For curatorial practice, the context is definitely, if not half, a very good part of the work. So when then creating conviviality, the only way that can be done is by acknowledging the local culture and how the local culture already created ways of gathering, ways of speaking, ways of exchanging ideas or distributing knowledge. And only once we have learned about that, then we can also connect with the curatorial conviviality.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think what, I don't know, am I allowed to add that maybe instead of local culture, we say local cultures, because sometimes it's like a definition of publics, right? You're living in the multicultural societies right now. And usually like, when I came here in Vancouver, you know, like as an immigrant, I could see the main discourse was the discourse of settlers and indigenous people, which is very important. And also, I think with my presence as the immigrant, and also bring the other discourses, right? So I think it's important to recognize the other cultures around, recognize what we have, and then define the public through this kind of recognition, which is very difficult because it's like a kind of possibility of impossibility. But I think it's give us a kind of space to not just think about prescription, but being far from it and find the, and understand the condition first to create that kind of, understanding. Yeah, I totally agree.
I just wanted, first of all, to thank you for, first of all, reshaping some of the thinking that I was verbalizing and making it way better by pluralizing them, because it's really important. And maybe that's why my brain immediately recreated this alarm, this suggested nationalism or something. Because, yeah, that's exactly it. Instead of speaking of culture, speaking of cultures, and acknowledging that that's always the case, that we live in a very complex world with lots of different interactions made also by minorities that sometimes are entirely invisible. And that needs acknowledgement. And I would say, interestingly, in a world that is so full of different cultures, curatorial practice can have a very important socio-political role to figure out new devices for those diversities, commonalities, tensions, affinities, to somehow get to term with each other and start a different dialogue, and really challenge also ways of cohabitation. Because interestingly, I've seen, above all within institution more than independent practice, lots of curators having to adjust to standards of so-called multiculturalism or diversity that are not by default really, responding meaningfully to tense situations or problematic topics of our contemporary world. And instead, I believe that as curators, we are actually also accountable a little bit for that. Our practice is, in my opinion, a practice that is related to social issues and political issues. So that would be one of the first steps towards a genuine and also fruitful conviviality.
Exactly. And, like when you're talking about devices, I think also, I think it's very important because based on each condition, we can think about devices. But also, I think sometimes there is a question that how can we break free from the constraints of our job definitions to embrace conviviality? Because sometimes there are some kind of plans, there are some kind of very, very firm definitions about our job. What this is what curator is going to do and should do, and these are the duties of curators. Sometimes it mixed with the administration, and it's more about administration than creative actions or research, right? So I think this is my question, like, how can we break ourselves free from, this kind of situation?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the first steps that I would probably recommend, both for freelance curators and for curators working with organizations, is to try to rediscuss and redefine the parameters of, for example, funding infrastructure or policies within the organization, in order to really operate at a level of the macro structure. So instead of just you trying to figure out how to break free, you try to change the infrastructure that is hosting you, so that perhaps you don't really need to break free because the set of conditions are a little bit closer to what is needed to be conviviality. Because if not, in the tentative to break free, you will start to live within a constant tense practice in which you recreate opportunities for your stakeholders, for artists, for perhaps practitioners from other fields. But then at a certain point, you just face the wall and you realize that you have created for yourself a cul-de-sac. There is no exit. I can give some examples. First of all, like in a way, let's say I don't know how to explain this. The best way I thought of really be convivial with someone is to think about everything also they need in order to participate in the conviviality and to be fully themselves and to be able to relax. And observing lots of people working with me, for example, in Glasgow, when I was public engagement curator at the Centre for Contemporary Arts, I noticed that above all for migrant communities, women within those migrant communities that perhaps were more vulnerable, more precarious, if they really wanted to participate in an activity, they were in need of childcare. And I started to embed this within the request of the funding that we would get so that I would offer the childcare. What I hadn't realized is that by doing that, I created a double standard somehow within the institution. The childcare could be offered to community members, but we didn't have money enough to offer the childcare to artists we were working with. And it seemed like it was kind of preferable that I wouldn't offer childcare at all, so that the double standard was not created. So somehow I tried to break free. But then instead of breaking free, I actually created an obstacle and a possible issue on an institutional level. While perhaps what I should have done was to tackle directly the issue, which is childcare for all, and figure out how that could be achieved. Perhaps needed more time, more effort, more money. But the reality is, by solving just one little piece of the puzzle, I couldn't really move and I couldn't break free at all. I was kind of encapsulated in a specific corner. And the examples are vast. Like most institutions would have specific agreements, for example, with suppliers. And if they have a building where perhaps there is a cafe or a gathering place that is actually managed by an external owner, then most of the time there are agreements about the fact that the food should actually be directly supplied by that bar, by that cafe, no? And so in the building, that's the only food that can really enter. Sometimes it's for hygienic control, but some other times it's just to secure that commercially you are not recreating some sort of conflict of interest within the building. But then once again, I would bring in lots of different communities, some of them coming from areas of multiple underprivileged. They couldn't afford to actually cover like a buffet or catering from the cafe. And equally, I couldn't afford to cover those costs. So sometimes the only solution was to actually have a conviviality that wouldn't include food, which for me is difficult to imagine. But it was the only way through, because there was no way we could afford actually to have the food. So again, that would have been perhaps solved if I would have directly tried to hit the target and acknowledge that whatever is the sort of deal that has been done over the years needs to be rediscussed, because if we really want to be accessible and if we really want to recreate moments of sharing and distribution of knowledge within the building, unless we change this thing is not going to happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it reminds me of, thinking when you're talking about sharing, and it shouldn't be, just food or goods or anything, it can also be a kind of sharing the feelings, sharing the space, sharing many things. So I think for this, we need to select our positionality, our position. And because it reminds me of one of the poems of Sadi Shirazi, Iranian poet. He says, a stranger has no friend unless they find another stranger. So this is very interesting for me, because I think sometimes we're thinking about inclusion, right? And this inclusion might create the exclusion for the others. And to change our position, like changing the inclusion first to exclusion, and then create another inclusion based on the situation that we are experiencing for each project, for each like a kind of work that we are doing. I think it creates a new connection. So like being far from our position and then create something again, something new based on condition that we are experiencing. So it's like a kind of creating plurality of singularities, you know what I mean? And this is also sometimes I feel, if I feel convivial in a space, does it mean that the others have the same feeling or no? Sometimes we think we are doing something because the title is convivial. It's about conviviality, but it's also think about this important question that we cannot just have a kind of absolute definition about conviviality. It is also good to know more about the differences of definition about conviviality, what conviviality means for the others, right? From different perspectives. Yeah.
There is something interesting I learned firsthand experience when I was living in Sweden. So interesting, I'm Italian, I come from the south of Italy. I come from a region called Puglia, where we witnessed lots of different foreign dominations and were influenced quite a lot by Spanish culture, I would say. And our way of speaking is very Baroque. So if you have a conversation with another person, as soon as you notice that the other person is about to finish the sentence, you are ready to start talking. And sometimes the two interlocutors will actually overlap. And that's a good sign. It means that they are actually enjoying themselves. There is a good, conversation. And if there is just a moment of silence, I think people would be scared to death. Something happened. It's not it's not a healthy sign of exchange with the other person. But then when I was working and living in Gothenburg in Sweden, I started to study Swedish language, and within one of the classes, the teacher explained that silence is very important in Swedish culture. And if you are with someone sharing time, the more they are silent, the better it means they are somehow experiencing your company. It means that they feel more at ease, comfortable. And I was thinking, I don't know how this is going to work with me, because of course my brain is just immediately thinking there is a silence, I need to say something. But then actually I should think that if there is a silence, it's a good thing. So maybe I should just stay silent. But then if I stay silent long enough, I'm not really sure I will feel comfortable. So maybe the other person is feeling comfortable, but I'm not sure how I'm living this moment of silence with another human being. So this for me was quite interesting. And of course, it's probably the one of the most polarized example I could potentially witness in my life, from someone experiencing dialogue and exchange as something that is fast, complex, and really full of words and never having an interruption or a pause, to the other one that is the more we pause, the better we are somehow living this moment together. And that for me is quite an interesting thing. And also, of course, it says a lot about how do we learn about the others, and how is that we can really transform the perception that we have of conviviality, our own and the one of the other, so that we can somehow both enjoy that moment together.
That's a very interesting point, I think, because, usually for creating a convivial space, we are thinking about the common, like what is in common between us. But sometimes I think maybe it's good to know about differences. Learning from our differences can create the convivial space as well. So, like as you mentioned, it's like knowing and learning from each other, because I think each culture has their own knowledge about conviviality, right? They own have, like what I'm doing with the Coffeehouse project is I'm traveling to different cultures to learn about their convivial tools, how they are convivial to each other. And so this kind of, giving the space to people to share what they have, I think it's a kind of convivial access, right? Yeah, but I'm so curious about your projects. I know that Vessel Art, art project is very well known in all over the world. You are the co-founder of that project, and also you have done a lot of convivial projects. So I really want to ask you to share about Vessel or any other project that you're feeling good about it, and also this is my question: that what convivial potentialities do this project have?
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you so much. Speaking about Vessel always makes me super, super happy. I feel full of joy whenever I speak about Vessel. Is it okay if I share the screen just now, so that for people that are interested in the project, I think Bahar also shared the link in the chat, but I'm going to share just a few slides. I hope you can all see it. So if you open that link, you will actually end up in our webpage, and there is this beautiful logo where you basically see this V of Vessel kind of coming out of the roots. But that was not our original logo. Initially, we were a geometrical vessel, and vessel was in our minds both a container where you could carry knowledge and ideas and tools and methodologies, everything, but also is like a part of your body, is a vessel. So it's really part of who we are. It's an essential part of who we are. And also the vessel is a boat. And the project is actually developed with ideas and environments that are very close to the sea. I will explain how and why. So we transformed the logo because the project transformed quite a lot. It was initially created between 2010 and 2011 by myself and Anna Santomauro. She's also a curator from the same region, now based in Sheffield, and the curator of Art Catalyst in Sheffield. And the original idea for us was to really recreate a platform, mainly for curators, because the region where we come from, I will just share the map so that you can see where we are. So it's like the southeast of Europe. So the region where we come from used to be rather poor and quite isolated, certainly not under the art contemporary map or spotlights. And we had observed already since 2010 different formats that had been used in the past in order to give more visibility to places and create more contacts. Of course, one option is always to recreate residencies where artists can actually visit the region and they can somehow learn about who we are. But we thought that we would have a stronger infrastructure for artists from the region to go around the world and or people from all over the world to be hosted there. And also there was a linguistic barrier. Not many people at that time would actually feel comfortable to speak English. So we started to create a small residency of 2 curators per time. In 2011, there were only other 2 residencies that would do that in all Italy. So it was quite exclusive, I would say. And then these curators would actually come and learn more about the region, so the culture that they could find there, or the cultures that they could find there, as well as the work that local activists, artists, scholars were actually conducting. So we were really taking them through a journey, discovering more about what's happening in Puglia. And you will find this on the website as well. This is a list of some of the projects. One of the latest one has been the Institute for the Imagination of the Mediterranean, which was actually recreated within a pavilion. So we had a physical space, not any longer. Now we are a nomadic project. But we also had this international curatorial workshop that would run every year. And host between 15 and 20 curators from all over the world, and was focused on specific topics like institutional critique or social engagement practice. And then we developed other projects like, for example, Giant Step, which was a symposium and a collaboration project together with Van Haben Museum in Eindhoven and Mostin Gallery in Wales and Labyrinth Gallery in Poland. Or Radio Materiality, which was a collaboration project funded by the EU, where we actually commissioned some podcasts. But the important thing was that we wanted to avoid to mimic the same dynamics that you could find in any Northern Hemisphere sort of project or in mainstream centers. For many reasons, we cannot achieve that. We don't have the money, the funding, the infrastructure to respond and create arts and conviviality in the same way. But we can offer something different, which is connection with local farmers or the use of our family bonds and our family connections. Even, vessel official headquarters is my grandparents' house. So it's really based on different principles, let's say. So this is an image for you to understand more or less the sort of activities that we would have conducted. In 2011, we did an exploration of an highly polluted side of the coast. And so in this group that you see, there were our practitioners, activists, architects, as well as teachers in elementary schools or dancers. And we were all learning together about the problematic of the territory and how is that the arts can actually spot the light on these sort of ecosystemic problems, and in this case specifically ecological pollution. And so generally what we do, we would arrange a trip and we would share food together, and we would have quite some time for a lunch or a dinner or a coffee break. And those are the moments that for us are the most relevant one, where the best conversations are happening. We generally don't record them, but we refer to them then in most of our brainstormings. So we tried to create more and more moments like that. It was intentional. It was not just accidental. So when I mentioned before the International Curatorial Workshop, for example, we would have, the usual sort of adverts as any other organization in the world, like through like eArt Now or platform that could share the information and do a proper selection through application. But then when the people would come, these are the sort of activities that we would do. So we would cook with the curators, and we would have lots of dining moments. And I would say, the idea itself of sharing food and having a decompressed moment where the conversation is not articulated by a PowerPoint like it is moment, or when you don't have the running order of a conference or a panel, recreates an entirely different way of conviviality and discourse also. And I don't know if you want me to give more and more examples, but because I have many, but this was just like a little hint to give, let's say, an idea of how we would operate. So generally we would, as I said, we would map the area, and via the connection with local communities and local players, we would actually learn about issues that really needs to be addressed. And then once we learn about the issues that are, priority for either the farmers or local workers, or it could be young mothers, then we tend to look into our toolbox and see if we have any tools that we can share. Most of them connected with hospitality, conviviality, social engagement practice. And then out of that, we somehow utilize, also instrumentalize in a positive way, the arts in order to either connect with his community and together with them elaborate further the social issues and figure out in a creative way if there is anything that can be done to review it, not perhaps to solve it, but to look at it under a different light and to figure out a different way of cohabiting with the issues if it's not possible for that to disappear or to be solved. And we have lots of different examples of these. Like the one example would be a film that we actually commissioned and then was produced also by Connecting Culture, which is another organization based in Italy. If you want to look at this film, you will find it online. It's by artists Nico and Julie, Tre Titoli. And this was a reflection around the question of slavery. Fortunately, in the south of Italy, as well as many other regions in the South Mediterranean, we still have slavery going on. If you think that slavery is too hard of a word, we are talking about human beings that are moving from north of Africa, the Levant area, as well as other regions of the Middle East, and coming to the south of Italy, entering predominantly via Sicily or Puglia, which is the second region of arrival, trying to escape from war zones, persecutions, and very problematic areas and very, very problematic situations back home, and then find themselves somehow becoming victim of local mafia strategies and black market, and they become our workers sans papier, like without, their documents are somehow taken from the boss if they have any documents, and therefore by default they somehow become our cheap labor for the tomatoes, for the wheat that you all have in your pasta, or for other products. They really support the development of agriculture in the region, but they are really treated with very poor resources. They have no rights, no contracts, and most of the time living in the worst condition you can imagine. So we actually commissioned an artist to study one of these communities with them, not to analyze them, but to study with them, to understand how the message could be delivered in a way that also art can help to bring a bit more awareness. And again, in order for this to happen, the artist spent a lot of time within the community, living with them. So it's not just about working in the sense of we are there, we are in a laboratory, we do certain things, and then we bring them to the gallery, but is more entering within the social milieu of a place and really engaging in their daily life and routines and figuring out ways in which that could also become part of, a creative process. I will stop sharing now. If anybody has got more questions as well, I will have way more pictures and ideas to share, but I think for now it's enough for Vasil, I think.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing this. Actually, it was my next question that I was trying to ask you, but you answered the question because I wanted to know that how you locate that vulnerability or that collective subject, and then how you activate it from noun to verb that you explained. For me, it was something like living with the problem, like, to understand the problem. And also it was like suspending the habits to create a shared situation, and then staying with the problem. Yeah, I think this is amazing. I like the way that you are doing. Because I need to think about the time, so I should ask you the next question, which is, in your opinion, how conviviality can be linked to collective learning and political transformation? Have you encountered such a situation in your project?
Yes, I encountered such a situation. Well, I think that conviviality in itself is a form of collective learning for all the things that we have mentioned so far. Even just to understand how to share space in a way that is tolerant, that is somehow questioning also the freedom of the other and your own freedom, and ways in which you can really learn from each other. In itself, that's all a question of learning. And I really believe the more we practice conviviality, the more we are exposed to some learning that could be extremely painful. It's really hard to learn that we have limitations. It's really hard sometimes to deconstruct values and very specific meanings that our cultures of belonging have created in us. So through conviviality, that's also a way to dismantle all that. And therefore, for me, that is collective learning. And it is a very socio-political act that comes from individual, but is also somehow only possible when is in connection with other people. So there is no, of course, this is just like, I would imagine it's common sense. There is no conviviality without the other. So the only possible way to exercise it is by collectively being invested in that and engaging with that.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, I think it's very important to see, like how we can learn and we can unlearn from the like the position, from the situation that we are staying on. Sometimes we need to unlearn to learn more, and also, as you mentioned, it's not like a kind of just one-way sharing from the curators to the publics or to the others. It's also like putting ourselves in the shared situation, to give the power to the others as well. Usually when it comes to institution, is something, everything is totally different, because usually we experience a kind of invisible hierarchies, but being far from that position, I think it's difficult, but it's still possible because it also shows a kind of care, a kind of ongoing care, you know, to create knowledge, to create new things, new words, new knowledge. Yeah, if you have something to add, please share it. But if not, I can return the moderation to Bahar for the Q&A.
I just wanted to add one thing.
Sure.
Specifically connected with this idea of institutions trying to embrace conviviality, which I would say within the institutional jargon is nowadays described as accessibility and diversity. So every single time I work in projects, and above all now at Boyd Art Center as a director, whenever we speak about access and we speak about care, I always stress the fact that the more we open up to a diverse audience and the more we become accessible, the more we need to prepare ourselves to confront languages, behaviors, protocols that would be entirely different than what we are used to. Because at the moment we are designed to be an echo chamber. That's, I would say, for most art organizations. And we are designed for the usual suspect. So when the unusual suspect really appears, it's not said that we are prepared for that. And that can only happen, we will only be prepared after experiencing conviviality with the unusual suspect for quite a time, quite some time. It's not just about training. How is that you deal with diversity? How is that you become more inclusive? No, it unfortunately, we will make mistakes because that can only happen, in my understanding, out of practice and real encounter of differences.
Exactly. Yeah. That's wonderful. Yeah. So let's share the space to the other people, make more convivial because it's a webinar, but I think we can have a Q&A, and Bahar, please have the same responsibility.
Great. Thank you for that, Viviana. That was a wonderful dive into creating collective spaces and learning and sharing and care. I'll go to our first question, which comes from Lisa. And Lisa says, as you mentioned, economic hierarchies within institutions, states, artists, audiences seem to be the latent and perhaps unspoken condition of our work, and comes through in this discussion and how it relates to making way for convivial spaces. Can you share some additional specific strategies you have used / creative response in addressing funders, stakeholders, private - corporate funders, board members, and others as you advocate for this work?
I really loved this question. Thank you so much, Lisa. So first of all, in case you are interested, we can also stay in touch and I can share as we go in the future weeks. But I would say that one of the first things I try to understand is to familiarize with a common language, things that the funders and the stakeholders could really understand. Like, let's say the terminology that we have been using for this conversation is something that I wouldn't use out of this conversation because they would probably get very lost in what we are trying to say when we use even the word conviviality or we use curatorial practice. So that's one thing, to really work out a common language and then use those words is not to trick them, but is to make them feel more at ease because it's something that they can follow and they can understand. Where I work, I don't have a lot of experience with private or corporate funders. I'm afraid I cannot help with that. The ecosystem within both continental Europe and the UK is pretty much related to governmental funding and foundations. So it's, at the end of the day, is private money, but is not with the same sort of patronage and donation schemes that perhaps are more common in maybe Canada or in the United States. But I would say I would also really try to humanize everybody I am working with. For example, whenever there is an opportunity for funding, and I really want the funder to understand the validity, the importance of the cost of hospitality, which most of the time are not even part of the budget they would offer. Then first of all, I would try to invite them, if possible, to the institution for them to experience hospitality, to have a moment of hospitality with me. And or I would call them or have a Zoom call nowadays, so that we can start to know each other. And it's not simply because I want to win them over. It's because I really believe that we need to deconstruct all this apparatus by starting to think that we are not just machine within a neoliberal capitalistic system, but we are human beings trying to operate with our best intention and make a difference in the arts and further afield. So if that's true, if we really believe in that, I don't want to know who is the foundation. The foundations are prestigious, they are very important, but I want to know who is behind the foundation. I want to meet with Stephanie, with Anthony, with, I really need to speak with them. And if they don't have time enough to give me their time, I'll probably not even apply. Because I think that it's important that we need to understand from the get-go exactly what are our priorities. And one of my priorities is to share with people, and they are between the people I would like to share with. And also I would say that I would think that, this famous popular sentence, the limit is the sky. I believe that's true. So whenever got any funding from these private foundations or even the local art council, I would imagine that even if it is just a dream, in my dream, that money can be doubled or tripled. So I will still try to convince them that there is an opportunity there to be tripled. So, for example, I'm not going to mention, as you've noticed, I didn't even make evident one foundation or a name, but in the past I had the opportunity to get a very interesting project funded by a wonderful foundation based in England. And the project was to support development of community interaction with newcomers. So refugees, asylum claimants, and migrants that were based in Glasgow. The project was entirely designed by the community, not by me. I was only the catalyst. And then I explained to the funders, I think that it would be even better if we get some resources to monitor the project and report everything about the project and stimulate in the future other organizations to do the same, so that instead that a curator has a vision and then you apply for the funding, this really comes from the community. They basically write the project and you are simply a facilitator in the whole process. The funder was so intrigued by the fact that I really wanted to challenge it and I wanted to evaluate it and think and check together with them if it was feasible in order to prove to other organizations and stimulate other organizations to work in a similar way, that they basically gave the organization and the project double the money they had originally offered for it. So when I'm saying I would try, is not because I never had good results with that. I think that it has proven to be a quite successful approach, and that is I think what I would advocate for, and really respond to this idea of breaking the hierarchies and also breaking somehow these boundaries between the I professionalized idea of who these people are and the fact that they are exactly as I am, eating the food, going to bed, having the same life as anybody else. So there is no reason for a veneer, for something to look amazing. We are just normal people, and there wouldn't be any reason, if they have the conditions to do so, to support us a little bit more. So I would also try that. I hope this doesn't sound patronizing. It's just you ask how I would do it or what, and how I would advocate for that. And these are two examples. I hope that helps.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing. And also, I think from your, response, I was thinking that this question actually came to my mind that it's good to define who is the stakeholder, right? Because those people who are working, who are in the project, they are also the cultural stakeholders, right? So it's good to think about it, and that's the reason that I really emphasize on the new, like definitions about every part of our projects, for based on the condition we are experiencing. And yeah, that's amazing. Thanks for sharing. And I think this is a very good achievement in the work because it's not easy at all. Yeah.
Can I just want to add one thing, like the opposite example, which is, and I can now disclose all the funders and people involved. When working at the CCA in Glasgow, I was awarded a very small grant for research and development by the European Cultural Foundation, which is based in Amsterdam. They were very interested in my proposal because generally what they had encountered in their past open calls was curators that would apply for research and development of a community to then develop a project. Instead, what I applied for was research and development from the community in order for us to possibly test out civic laboratory, and what it would mean to create together tools for a civic experience of the neighborhood where the CCA was actually located. We did the project generated, a great engagement. Thousands of people were actively part of it. We co-designed a website, we had regular meetings, we had meals together. We did so many different things with kids, families, teenagers, transient community, and users also of the area, people that were just going to the area to work, that were not living there, were not residents. And after a while, someone contacted me from the Lottery Fund, which I don't know if people are familiar, but within all the UK is probably one of the biggest, richest foundation. It's a very strange fund because you basically come from the surplus of the people that are buying the lottery ticket. And most of the time in the UK, those are people that are not the richest. So it's really interesting because it's money that comes from perhaps not so privileged inhabitants of England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, but then it goes into arts and culture and it gets invested to sometimes recreate workshop for the same community that they bought, that initially bought the lottery ticket. So it's quite an interesting thing. But they contacted me and they said, we noticed that you are developing this project with the local community, and we would actually be happy to support you into an application for the lottery fund. So of course I thought this is amazing and so much money. But I replied by saying, I cannot give you an answer because this is not my project, is the community project. So I need to ask them. So I explained, we had full brainstorming, and they said, we want to meet someone from the lottery fund and really ask specific questions, and then we will consider. So I had to ask, can you please come meet us in Glasgow? Have this conversation. And so we did. So this person accepted. And then as a result of all this, the community decided they didn't want to apply for the lottery fund. So actually, we never even tried with the CCA. It was a massive opportunity that we lost, but it was what the community wanted. And so this is also interesting. In the moment in which you open up a process of authorship and ownership of the project, you also need to accept that you are not really in full control, and that things are somehow subjective to the scrutiny, analysis, and decision-making of the community, or the collaborators, the stakeholders that you have involved.
This is fantastic. It's like, more staying with the ethics values instead of just bringing money and making project and then being successful. The meaning of success in this quite political, atmosphere. Yeah, this is amazing. Thanks for sharing this. So, Bahar, if there's any questions.
Yeah, maybe I'll ask the next question just to give everybody some time to type in the Q&A. We do have a few minutes left. Viviana, that's so interesting to hear this kind of agency within the community actually being activated. It's not just hearsay or just speak. This actually is given to the community, whether they can say yes or no, it's within their hands. And I don't think I've seen that kind of approach anywhere else. So I do just want to commend you for that. I have a question that's kind of been burning in the back of my head as you've been speaking for the past little while. And it's about conviviality and sort of evolving curatorial approaches. And you've touched on this, but I'm curious about the concept of curating with care and how that intersects with the idea of conviviality, and especially in the context of all of these social interactions and the associated hospitality that comes with conviviality. And this idea of care is so rooted into your curatorial approach. So I'm wondering if you can elaborate further on maybe strategies of care you have, or the things that you've been thinking about in terms of curating with care.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for the question. So first of all, I think that curating with care is a little bit redundant, because curating, it includes care. There is no curating without care. But that's because it's rooted in the word, and because I believe is a principle of curating. But you are right, we live in an age in which we need to say curating with care, because there is lots of existing curating without care. So if the word is suggesting that it's a contradiction in terms, if we added it because it's already included in the word, then the reality of it is actually different. And it's important now to overstate, claim care. The ways in which, not only by myself, but together with Anna Santomaro, the co-founder, and Benedetta Dettore, which is now working with us for our programs and our projects and facilitating, producing, co-organizing, I would say that we have changed quite a lot our engagement with care, and try to follow what are also the new needs of care. Because in the past, for example, if you just think about us organizing a gathering and a moment of conviviality in 2011, there was very little awareness around dietary requirements and allergies. And, even just the basic rule that now everybody would use. I'm not talking about 100 years ago. I'm talking about, something like 13 years ago, it was already a different moment in time, even just thinking about that. And also there was not as much awareness about neurodiversity, and which is also, in my understanding, including in caring and caring for the other, how these people are going to read pamphlets that we are going to give them, or how is that they are going to feel more relaxed, for instance, within a space because of its color. I would say that we have adjusted our caring, curating practices because of more and more awareness coming not only from the region, but from all over the world. And I would say that we haven't so far created a formula. So I wouldn't be able to answer to what is exactly that we are doing in that respect, because it's constantly changing and is constantly reevaluated, and is a full process of learning and unlearning. The moment we think we have captured how we can make it more caring, parameters would change. So think, for example, I don't know if it's the same in Canada. There was a moment in which it would be just normal for every single meeting to start with the pronouns. People would feel more comfortable if they would actually share a notion of their gender, sexual orientation. I think that now this is still present. People would use it, for example, in a Zoom call next to their name or in their emails, but more and more often, it's not how we would open up a meeting. But perhaps there is more care around visibility and invisibility and different perception. People would start to narrate how they look in case there is someone that cannot really see them. So the level of awareness about a caring attitude and also performed within a curatorial practice, both when we curate and work with artists, with local communities, with other peers, or within other sectors, it's constantly changing depending on the needs of that care that needs to be performed. And so I would say that, as I said, we don't have a formula, but we are certainly trained more and more to be very, very attentive, good observers of what would be the caring tools that we need to develop in order to really have a more, let's say, welcoming and easy conviviality within a diverse group of people. I don't know if that answered entirely your question, but I hope that somehow I replied.
No, it did. Absolutely. The process itself is the paradigm. You use this kind of non-static, dynamic approach as the strategy. It's just this ability to be adaptable, willingness to take criticism and to shift as need be on a need be basis rather than having an approach where it's A, B, C, and this is how we're going to do it.
Mm-hmm. There is one person that we haven't mentioned as yet, but is I would say, the common denominator between all the different people that have been mentioned before, even references that we used. And this person is Irit Rogov. I would say I wouldn't have elaborated as much in my curatorial practice if I hadn't received the first input from Irit Rogov. And this was years and years ago, probably 2008, in Trento, a small town. I mean, if they hear me, small, medium-sized town in the north of Italy. She was invited by a local curator and historian who is also part of Basel board, called Roberto Pinto. And she, at that time, was trying to reflect on the glossary of art, all the words that we would use, like audiences and museum, and what they really mean and how we can redescribe them. And that, for me, was an inspiration, thinking that things don't need to be as they look. We can constantly wonder, redescribe them, question them, analyze them, test them differently. And there is this level, of meta-curatorial in which you stay with the subject and you really try to understand what are the possible ways in which you engage, what are the possible ways in which you care, what are the possible ways in which you are hospitable. And then you formulate your words, your tools. And I think that for me has been one of the most transformative moments of my curatorial practice, where I really understood that things can be different than what they are, and we have the power to transform them. And so from that moment on, I probably started this rather unorthodox behavior in which I just don't accept anything for what it is. That's my default condition for anything. But that is rather helpful because if is not perceived just as a sort of non-constructive behavior, because I'm not doing it just for being confrontational. I'm not doing it just for being conflictual. I'm doing it just to give us another option, what that can be, what that could be. Then if people can really perceive for the positive, dynamic that can really engender, then I think that's recreating a different way of operating and also a different idea of what care could be. which I think at the moment is a word that needs to be deconstruct and reconstruct. And I didn't do that exercise, but we could do it in another conversation.
That's amazing. Thanks for bringing her name. Yeah, it's I remember, like, because in Goldsmiths, you know, like we worked on the conviviality for during the last year, and one of the persons that we were in touch in Delfina and with Irid and the group of advanced practices we learned from her was Viviana and her practice. So I can see these connections, and yeah, thanks for sharing all this. I think I myself, I really owe to Irid. I think, you know, like I owe it because of, you know, like helping me and like giving me the option of thinking differently in each situation and condition. And I think this is very important to redefine, you know, all the protocols, all the, you know, definitions in each project. That's amazing. Yeah, any other question? I think, Bahar, is there any other question? Because I know that it's very cold there, and Viviana needs to have a dinner as well. Yeah, but if there's a question, please ask everyone. Yeah.
No, I don't think there's any more questions in the Q&A. Viviana, thank you so much for spending this past little while with us and sharing your insights and your, I wouldn't call them unorthodox. I think this should be the new orthodox. This should be the new way to move forward in curatorial practice. And I thank you for joining us in your evening, in our afternoon, and to the audience for spending this past hour with us. Thank you to you, Elham, and to the audience, we invite you next Sunday, January 28th from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. at Delaney's Coffeehouse on Denman Street. So if you're in the city, if you're in Vancouver, drop by for some coffee, some conviviality, and a nice chat on curatorial approaches. Thank you to you both, and enjoy the rest of your day and night.
Thank you, Bahar. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Ciao, Viviana, and yeah, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.